them. I already got a chance to talk to a few of them. Feel free to share this for some of the families that weren't able to make it. Let me start off by doing this first. We have some new families, started working with some new schools this year. I'm really excited about it. Let me first introduce myself because we maybe have talked through text or email, but my name's Dan Fedrosi. After I left college coaching, I started athletic recruiting, education, and navigation. And when I have been working with AREN Consulting, it is really trying to think and what I can do to help the families and the coaches. And I spent a lot of time this past holiday season, over Christmas, over the New Year's, as I was traveling with my family to go back to Michigan to see my family and my wife's family. And I always have kind of looked at signing day this past December as the kind of the start of the recruiting process year. So you've got about a month buffer before the new year kicks over. But really when that first signing day hits, that's kind of, to me, the start of a process, a cycle of process. So for instance, the 2024s, I consider you all seniors now. It's just the way I view it. And I've been really kind of racking my mind, thinking about what message I can share, what I can do to help. I've really enjoyed with the families and the coaches. I talk to the coaches a lot. I think even me and Coach Tester were messaging, today and yesterday, a couple of days ago, especially because we've started working recently together. I talked to them a lot, but I'm like, okay, in my mind, I wanted to think of what can I do to share a message to the families, to the student athletes, also to the coaches, but they hear from me so much. And I really strongly believe this message, I think tonight is going to be great, because for me, what I have noticed in the last 2 years of doing AREN Consulting is the mental pressure of recruiting is a real thing. Okay, when me and John were playing, it just wasn't the same because there weren't as many factors. There weren't as the social media obviously wasn't around. You were lucky to play on, John played in the state championship. So did I that year. We played on TV. Well, nowadays kids are streamlined on social media, even their high school may even carry it. Recruiting is just so different. And I have felt over the last 2 years, so I'm going on a little over 2 years of starting this, I can see mental pressure impacting kids on their film. I get out to practices here and there, especially with my schools in Wisconsin, but I really can see it tangibly impacting players. And the biggest thing I have seen right now is I have seen players, in my opinion, in my evaluation, to get almost worse from their junior year to their senior year. Now, things happen. Kids develop differently. Maybe they didn't get better. They just stayed the same. That's part of it. But I can feel and sense that mental weight pressure, especially from recruiting, in that senior film. And then I go back and watch their junior film, and I'm like, wow, I don't know if I saw them take the same. So this message is actually aimed at attacking that mental side of it. So for the prospects that are on here, I appreciate you coming on. For the parents, especially, this is something for you to soak in and think about and understand that your messaging to your student athletes is really important. There's not much we can do about social media and the people that we can't control. But the reality is within your circle, I think this message is really important. And I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to try to keep my message to 20, 25 minutes. Then I'm going to let John get a chance to jump on. And if I see Hubert or if I find him on the list here, we'll give him a chance to talk. I use this term here, D1 or bust, and I use this for a reason. Okay, I hear this a lot. And as I've gone around and I've talked to families, I've talked to programs, a lot of times I hear the messaging of coaches or people that are influencing young student athletes say, don't have that D1 or bust mindset. Now, for me personally, I actually don't agree with that. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight. That's what I'm getting at with the messaging. Like when you start saying, don't have that D1 or bust mindset, it's almost like you're pushing kids to go play at small college. And I'll use D2 for an example. My opinion is you have to find the right level for you. And then you have to evaluate the options and opportunities that you do have. So I'm using this term a little bit loosely, but it did get me going. I want to start talking more this year about message. Yeah, there are some things that we will always talk about as far as the big buzzword exposure. What do you need to do to develop? Obviously, your coaches handle that, but I can give some thoughts from my experience as a college coach. It's really mindset that I see impacting families, especially parents that call me with questions, and then the student athletes when I see their film. So I have kind of a couple topics here. I have kind of a couple notes that I wrote down to try to keep me on track here a little bit. So when I think about small schools in D1. This is going to kind of entail maybe more Division II, Division III, and this is going to maybe entail more of your, obviously your FBS schools like we all saw Monday night, the Georgias, the TCUs of the world, maybe even drop down to what I would consider like the MAC level. But there's so many different areas of Division I. But I want to talk about some pros and cons to both levels. That's the messaging tonight. And then I'll kind of wrap up with how I think that filters back into the Division I or bust mindset, and why I actually think it's okay to have that mindset. But let's talk about why. So I want to talk about some pros and cons. And I think John and Hubert will be able to have really some great perspective. John played with me at Saginaw Valley. He was by far one of the best players. I'm not saying it because he's on here. John's a friend of mine. We were in each other's weddings. John was an incredible player. Okay. But I'm talking small schools in Division II, and I'm going to kind of reference something that he may message. But the first thing that I think is a major pro for playing small college, I really mean it. I hope everybody can read my writing. It's that chip on your shoulder that you carry. And I wanted to try to expand this a little bit. And I'm going to write in here, so I'm hopeful everyone can see this pretty well. I'm going to write in here the word drive. That drive of kind of being overlooked when you are coming through the process is something extremely valuable. Now, for the student athletes on here right now, you know, maybe you're not old enough to really feel that, but someday you will. I know for me, for instance, I started a company and I really enjoyed it. And I think there's a lot to be said. I could probably make a statement that my drive of carrying that chip on my shoulder of being a D2 guy has put me into this position. And that is extremely valuable. Maybe that's a message that parents will probably carry over a little bit more right now, tonight, than the student athletes. But if there's 24s, 25s, 26 student athletes on here, that will matter someday. Okay, so that's a really big positive. Carrying that chip on your shoulder can be extremely valuable in your life. But obviously there's some student athletes that might be 14, 15 years old right now. That's the last thing on your mind. So I think about, I don't want to always just talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each level, but I do want to kind of give a couple examples of that drive outside of me. It's easy for me to give my examples. It was funny because I was watching Oregon play Washington State this year. And if anybody is familiar with the name Dan Lanning, it's because he's now the head coach at Oregon. He's pretty young. I think he's young, so he's got to be my age because he's not as old as John, but he's got to be a little bit younger. I think he's in his 30s. Well, Dan Lanning played at a school called William Jewell. And I highly doubt anybody in this conversation, except for maybe Coach Evans, who knows every college in the country, would know William Jewell is a little NAIA school in Missouri that, again, probably no one's ever heard of. I don't know him at all, but I would bet my life savings that same drive of him maybe not getting a chance to play at Missouri or be recruited by Arkansas and play there is driving him at such a young age to be pretty successful at Oregon at such a young age. I would guess. I'm kind of making a little bit of a statement for him. There's another name that I'm going to write up here as I kind of cross out William Jewell here. I'm going to write up the name Jake Dicker. Now, I know Jake. He's the head coach at Washington State right now. And like I said, there was a carryover as I was watching this game. I didn't know where Coach Lanning played, and they mentioned that. Well, I know where Coach Dickert played. He played at Stevens Point here in Wisconsin. Okay, I worked with him. He was a graduate assistant with myself at North Dakota State. His rise to be the head coach at Washington State has been nothing short of phenomenal. I know for a fact that drove him. I know for a fact that what he learned at Stevens Point and what he felt like he could achieve is what drove him. And I think that's an extremely valuable thing that we cannot forget. But this is something that maybe you can't see because that's going to be possibly 10, 15 years down the road. So parents, families, coaches, we're the ones that kind of have to remember this as we're going through the process, because very few 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds are going to be excited about the prospect of what's going to happen 15 or 16 years down the road from now. But I'm telling you, I'm a firm believer that that's a very big positive. But I'm not here to knock Division Ones. I told John and Hubert when I talked to them, I said, at the end of the day, this is not about selling a level. I think Division I is awesome. My experience at North Dakota State, now we were not the power that they are now. My first year, we actually went 3-9. That was back in 2009. In 2010, we kind of snuck into the playoffs. And this past Sunday, they played for their, I think, 10th national championship out of 12 years. They lost to a really, really good football team. But when I think about Division I wrote up the word network there. That networking, that opportunity from a school like a Michigan or a Pitt, that carries a lot of positive weight also. So there's a lot of positives here. Again, I'm not selling small schools and that, hey, you're going to have this track. You can have the same at Division I, and that networking is really valuable. I even kind of wrote some notes down here as I was thinking about it earlier. At the end of the day, I may go somewhere and even just on an interview, that's a big conversation starter. Oh, wow, you played at Michigan. It's the nature of humans. I would do it. I played at Saginaw Valley, had a phenomenal experience. And if I saw a kid play at Michigan, I would talk to him about it. Oh, when did you play? I saw you play. That can be an extremely positive thing. Again, I kind of put network. These are, in many cases, big schools. I mean, Michigan's a massive university. Wisconsin is a massive university. A lot of kids that go there. So those graduates go all over the place. Some, stay local. Some head out all over the country. Maybe your intention is to go to work out on the East Coast or the West Coast. There's a strong chance, just because of the size of those schools at times, that network and what your diploma says, you may be able to reach more job opportunities. So I think, again, I'm not here to knock Division I. The reality is there's a lot of extremely positive things. I did actually write kind of a negative down here under this one, under the network for Division I, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. When I wrote down the word, go back to my blue marker hanging there. I wrote down the word entitlement, and I don't want this to come off wrong, because again, I think I was searching maybe for a better word. But the reality is, no chance I spelled this correctly. I wrote down entitlement because the reality is, when things like your recruitment process lands you at a Wisconsin, a Michigan, a Georgia, there is some entitlement that comes along with that. You're provided more opportunities. You're provided with a bigger recruiting experience. Not to say it's right or wrong, but that sometimes can seep into that as I go into the working world. And that's kind of like a little bit of a negative, that maybe I'm just kind of expecting to get out of college and get that job working for Goldman Sachs as my first job. Or maybe I think I'm going to get that first job making 6 figures, and I'm a little nervous to take that first opportunity making 40, 50,000. And I know the day and age is changing and money is only going up. But I think there's something that can come along with that Division I, that you have to be careful, that you have to be ready to fight that entitlement piece that comes with Division I. I mean, with the smaller schools, I don't run out of room here on the smaller schools one, but a lot of times, I just said it for the Division I schools, a lot of times you're going to deal with smaller universities. So I'm going to put right down here is, maybe your opportunities are smaller out of college. Maybe there's just not as big of a network. Maybe if I'm at Saginaw Valley, my best opportunity is going to be down somewhere in Detroit or locally. Maybe I don't get to span out. So there's always pros and cons to everything. The second piece here I wanted to jump onto, and I've got build written down here for under the small school. So we're going to kind of erase these as I go. Again, this is recorded, so hopefully everyone can go back if they wanted to review that first section. I think this is kind of a really unique one that a lot of people don't think about. I got build here and NT. This stands for national champion, national title, and then there's a question mark. When you get a chance to play at a smaller school, I firmly believe this, you have a chance to build something and be successful in the many cases, no matter where you go. I really believe that the disparity in talent and level at the smaller schools is very, very small. Me and John and Hubert played against a school called Ferris State. And you all may have heard of Ferris State right now, but when we played against them, it was like show up, score 40, John makes 50 tackles, and we move on and go hang out and watch the Michigan game later that night. It ain't like that anymore. Ferris State has turned the corner. They are by far the premier Division II program in the country, in my opinion. They have really ascended. That can happen at Division II. That can happen at Division III. I have, in my 2 years here, Whitewater has not won a national title. They've been right there. But when I was coaching at North Dakota State, Whitewater was the premier program in the country. And it really, in many cases, it wasn't even close. So the chance to build something is more, I'm going to put realistic here. So that's a positive. If I have a chance to go play at Minnesota Duluth, there's a really strong chance you could contend for a national title. They didn't make the playoffs this year. I think they were 1 game out. But you have a legitimate chance. Almost any program you go to, maybe there's 4 or 5 schools that, man, they really got to take a next step to get into a tier of competitiveness. But I watched a Davenport team who just started football, I believe 10 years ago, made it to the playoffs this year. And they played against, I think, Grand Valley in the first round. So you have a realistic chance to build into something that is awesome. That growth and that building process is really fun. That's a really cool experience. Again, me and John and Hubert were part of that at Saginaw Valley. We ascended it to a certain level. It was really neat. Now, the negatives of this, and again, I'm not here to say any level is better than that. I'm here to talk about pros and cons. I'm going to put a positive there for the realistic chance to develop, to build a program. But the negative is you're probably not going to play in front of 20,000 people. In our biggest games, and we were extremely good. I do believe we played 1 versus 2 at one point in our careers. I think we played in front of 10, 11, 12,000 people. Our stadium could hold a good chunk. We would close in on 10,000 at our stadium for our biggest games. But the reality is you're just not going to play in front of what Michigan plays in front of. You're going to be lucky to play in 15K as far as on a game day experience. Now, if you want to view that as a negative, kind of society will tell you maybe that's not as cool as playing in front of what we all saw Monday night. Obviously playing for the national championship, Georgia and TCU, but that's something you really have to consider. You know, is playing at Camp Randall in front of 90,000 people more important than just playing? These are the things to consider. I'm not here to tell anybody it's better or worse. I'm here to tell you these are the realistic things that you should take into account in the process. When I kind of move over to Division I, I'm actually going to kind of start with something that might be negative from this standpoint. If I'm at a lower level program, do I really have a chance to win a national title? And I'm going to use a couple examples. I don't know these programs. I don't speak for them. But like, let's use Miami of Ohio as an example. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, they won the MAC. I don't remember which bowl game the MAC championship is associated with it. It used to be the Motor City Bowl in Ford Field, and that was a cool deal. But that was kind of your ultimate end goal. Now, as they expand the playoffs, can a team like Western Michigan, who played in the Cotton Bowl when Coach Fleck was there, could they get in there and make some hay? I don't know. I have feelings on that. But the reality is you're going to go to Division I, and you may not have much of a goal other than win your conference and just have a good season. So the ability to kind of be number one in the country at a smaller school, super realistic, in my opinion. Okay, the chance to win a national title, the chance to be number one, there's maybe only 10 or 15 schools in the country that you can say it. So I'm going to put this a little bit as a negative, playing at Division I. Now, however, again, trying to flip all this around and give pros and cons to everything. If I play Division I get a chance to, maybe if I go to Georgia Southern and I get to play against Georgia in a non-conference game, you get to see what it's like walking into Sanford Stadium. That's a pretty cool deal. I don't know all the non-conferences that everybody picks up, but I know Illinois State came out here and played Wisconsin that year. That's a pretty cool experience. It might only be one time. It might only be one experience, but you're just not going to get that from a smaller school. You know, so I'm going to put here, as far as I wrote down with one of my notes, big game energy. It's kind of a weird term, but that big game energy, that energy of having ESPN there for game day. Now, I know they went to Jackson State. They've been at North Dakota State. They've come to, so I think they did do a Division III game years ago. That big game, you kind of have to build that at the smaller schools, and you can feel it. When we were running around playing against Grand Valley 1 versus 3, I didn't care whether there was 5 people in the stands or the 12,000 like there was. But to play in that environment like Camp Randall, it only comes from one place. So I think that's a very big positive. And obviously that draws in a lot of people. They get very excited about that. But the reality is it's just more than that, in my opinion. But that big game energy does come from those big levels. I want to talk about now resources here. And again, I'm going to erase kind of what I had under build and national title. Because again, pros and cons to everything. I've got resources here on the bottom, and I might write my pros and cons here. If you can see it, it actually has got an arrow down, but a question mark next to it. And then under Division I, you have an arrow up. I think a lot of times the perception is that Division I has more resources. In many cases, that's true. Okay, but there are some phenomenal small schools that the facilities I've seen, Grand Valley, Whitewater. I mean, Northwest Missouri and Pitt State used to play at Arrowhead. I don't know if they do anymore. I have not seen that lately. They would play in front of 20, 30,000 at that game at Arrowhead. That is a neat deal. Obviously, those two schools have the resources pooled together to make that happen. But in many cases, Division II, Division III, sometimes your NAIA may not have those same resources. You're not going to show up and have your locker just filled with gear. John was lucky to get a shirt and a pair of shorts to run around in. And then when he sweat through it after one day of workouts, he was begging for me to get him one. Okay, so resources at the smaller schools, the reality is they, and many times, can be lower, but it's not 100% exclusive. And the resources at Division I schools, we've all watched videos of some of these multi-million-dollar facilities that Michigan, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, they're all doing. That is an extremely unique thing. But there, to me, this is probably the biggest one where you're going to get the pros and cons with resources. You know, I'm going to put the word here, accountability. And this is where it's going to be a little bit tricky. So I want to make very clear on this. Accountability. I don't know. Accountability. Stick with me. I don't think I put an L in there somewhere. But accountability is what I thought about today. If I'm at a smaller school, you have to remember now, these coaches are people. These administrators, they're human. They understand if you don't have every possible resource, every possible piece of nutrition, the best possible strength training facility on earth, that maybe you do need time to develop. So I actually put accountability here as you're going to possibly be given more time to develop. So I kind of have the down arrow here as the negative at Division II or Division III or NAI perceived sometimes. But also the positive of it is, yeah, you're going to be held accountable. You're going to be coached extremely hard. I mean, our coaches and the places I was at, we coached our kids to the same level as these coaches, but we also had some what I call feel. We understood like this kid needs another year. We don't have a massive training table to give him, to expect him to put 20 pounds on in a year. That's not realistic. So that young student athlete was provided 2-3 years, and then they generally made those gains. But the positives and negatives moving over to Division I is kind of the same thing. It is a win now or else. So for smaller schools, this is kind of your negative and that's your plus. This is kind of your plus, but this is kind of your negative. This is a multi-million-dollar industry, and in some cases, $1 billion industry. If you're not good enough in year one, they are absolutely sitting you down and saying, you're not good enough to play here. We got to go find someone else. I'm not here to tell you it's right or wrong. That's not my job tonight. But I'm here to tell you, this is what comes with playing at the highest levels. And again, if you're a 18-year-old kid, it may be tough to hear that. Geez, all I need is time. These coaches, they're on one-year contracts now, it seems like some days. They absolutely have to win now. So they're going to be a little bit more pressure packed on you. Maybe you love that. Maybe that's awesome. We kind of go back to the first one. Maybe that's actually what drives you, and that's fine. But if you're a player, if you're a family now that has a son who's growing and developing, and you know, hey, listen, it may take you a while. You have to be prepared for that when you step into this environment. If a Wisconsin or a Georgia or a Michigan or a Michigan State thinks you're good enough, well, if that first year you're not producing, then they're going to tell you flat out. Where at the smaller levels, you're given a little bit more grace period. So absolutely pros and cons that come along with kind of those resources. The higher levels, in many cases, the resources can be viewed as the plus, and it is true. They're great facilities, unbelievable environments, but that win now or else mentality is tough, and it's a tough part to be a part of. For the small schools, in many cases, you'll get more time. I've watched Ferris State develop their kids with 4- and 5-year seniors. They run a quarterback system where they play multiple kids and they've kept their kids happy. You just don't see that at the higher levels because it's that win now mentality. The last thing I'm going to wrap up with, and I'm going to turn it over to John for a few minutes to talk, is I'm going to talk a little bit about social media. Okay, there are pros and cons to social media when it comes to small school and, again, the Division I mindset. So I'm actually going to put social media right here, kind of in the middle. We've all dealt with social media now over the last 5-10 years. For some of the new families, I really work to try to educate students and the players and the coaches on how to use social media. It has to be a tool, but there's an extremely tough side that comes with social media. This is in many cases where that mental pressure can be inflicted the most and wear on the kids. So over here, I'm going to start with the small schools, not for any reason. I just wanted to talk about them first. You know, in many cases, social media, I'm going to put less NOT, that stands for notoriety. In many cases on social media, just because we're human, people make mistakes. They get, like all of us, adults and kids alike, we get blown away by big flashy things. Okay. At the smaller levels, it just doesn't carry that same level of notoriety. But at the end of the day, so I'm going to put that as a negative. But at the end of the day, the positive is you get to be a kid. And I'm going to transition that right over to the Division I now. Oh, there's a ton of notoriety. Oh, you get noticed and you're on ESPN and you're making your announcement, high notoriety. It's really cool. You're kind of feeling that high, right? That's that plus. That negative, have we all seen some of the stuff these people have said to kids on social media? It's crazy. And what people are allowed. I'm gonna put awful. This is the word. The awful stuff that gets said to a kid if he drops a pass, God forbid. The things that get said to a player if he misses a block and it gets seen on ESPN. So the pros and cons alone of Division I in small school is something you have to really understand. Doesn't mean you don't take this Division I opportunity because you're going to be told hurtful things. It's a part of growing. It's a part of life. But being in this element, especially for the student athletes to hear this, if people aren't reaching out to you on social media all the time, it's not that bad of a thing. Because maybe a game when you struggle and you line up against Grand Valley, you don't play your best, and you guys don't win that big game, which I've been a part of, unfortunately, you're not going to get blasted on social media to the same extent as this awfulness that happens to the bigger, schools, the bigger represented schools and things of that nature. So I think when you kind of pare this down, I really think this is a little bit less for me of Division I or bust, as it has got to be what you want. What do you want out of this process? Because I can go off 100 names, including the guy that's going to go talk next, that went from little schools and have played in the NFL. But I can also list off thousands of names that went to big schools and went to the NFL, and then vice versa. We can all do that going either way. It's not about finding a goal. It's about understanding the pros and cons that come in this process. There is literally no perfect program. I don't care what anybody tells me. Coach Smart down at Georgia's obviously done a phenomenal job. His program's not perfect. Coach Saban's program isn't perfect. Coach Harbaugh's program isn't perfect. Okay. Coach Brady at Saginaw Valley, his program isn't perfect. Even Coach Anise at Ferris. You can go down the list. There's no perfect fit. There's pros and cons to this process. So that's my feeling on it. It's not so much about saying don't have that Division I or bust mentality. It's about saying, what do I want? What is important to me? If this is all that matters, then let's just go attack Division I. But I might be saying to you at the end of the process, well, listen, you don't have any opportunities. Maybe college football isn't for you. But at the same time, with the smaller schools, what I do not want, one of my biggest fights in this process, I do not want a kid to take an opportunity, only to take an opportunity and then quit a year later and take that away from some kid who just wants to ball. So I think when you look at it, there's pros and cons to everything. I've really been adamant about trying to share this message. I hope my few minutes here has done that. But for the parents that are on this, that are part of AREN, these are only AREN families that I invited here. This is not something I promoted, try to get more people. This is a message that I will be sharing throughout the year, as much as you all will like to hear. The coaches have had a chance to kind of hear this from me. And now I'm going to pass it off to John here a little bit. And I think, John, you should have the ability to unmute yourself now at this point. I think I took that function off. I'm going to pass the mic over to John for a few minutes. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to step back and listen. I didn't tell John what to say. Okay, again, John is a friend of mine. I appreciate him jumping on and talking for a few minutes, but this is whatever John feels. So I'm going to allow John a few minutes to talk. Take as much time as you like, John. Please have.
Can you hear me, Dan? Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to come on this call. I want to say hi to Coach Mike Evans there. Great football coach, and glad that he's still out there doing his thing. But I just love the message that you're sending there. I guess just tell a little bit about myself. Like Dan had mentioned, played at a successful high school. We went to 2 straight state championships and had a successful career there. And I had an injury in the state championship game. I broke my leg. So coming out of high school, recruiting was a little difficult for me. Had some Mid-American Conference teams looking at me, the MAC, teams like Central, Western, Bowling Green, some schools like that. And I had a lot of the Division II schools in the GLIAC, the league that we played in at Saginaw Valley, looking at me. And, it was a little difficult, I think, going through that process, just not really knowing, where I stood in terms of, the level of need at the Division I level and, where they saw me fit. Coming out of high school, I was a little undersized. I was about 195 pounds playing linebacker. And it seemed like at that time they were looking for guys that are mostly anywhere between 215 and 225 coming out of high school, maybe even a little bit bigger. So, just going through that process and, slipping through Division I and going to Division II. For me, it was just a feel, just once I got to Saginaw Valley, I visited Grand Valley and Ferris and some of those bigger schools. And it just was the right feel for me once I got to Saginaw Valley and just, our head coach there, Randy Ari, he was someone that I felt like was truthful and honest with me throughout my recruiting process. And I just felt like he cared about me throughout that process. And I felt that, his program was the best for me. And for me, it was just a feel thing. And I felt like the program was successful before I got there. And, I was only going to hopefully add to that success. And, I think that, you mentioned having a chip on your shoulder earlier. I think throughout my whole career, I just always played with a chip on my shoulder. And that was kind of what you mentioned earlier about having drive. I've seen guys in the NFL land these big contracts, and I've seen their productivity go down, like you've mentioned. I felt like I've always kind of had that drive just because, when I was out on the field, I always tried to feel like I was the best player on the field. And, when I went to Division II, it wasn't like I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't feel like I felt like I was better than any of the other guys. I just still had that mentality that when I took the field, I was going to try to be the best football player on that field. And that's just kind of what I carried with me. And then once I landed a spot up in Buffalo as an undrafted free agent, I just kind of went in there with the same mentality. It doesn't really matter what school any of these guys came from. We're all wearing this Buffalo Bills helmet right now. And at the end of the day, they're going to keep the best 53 guys on the roster. They're going to keep 7 linebackers that season. And if I could be in the top 7 out of the 12 linebackers that were there, then, I felt like I had a good opportunity to do that. And it didn't really matter what school I went to. It just mattered that I had the drive, like you mentioned, and I had the passion to go out there and make plays. And none of that other stuff really mattered to me. It was just the opportunity that I had and the time that I was given to take that opportunity. I really dialed in on it and made the most of it. And unfortunately enough, I was able to make the roster that year, and I had a 3-year career out of it. So something I'm very proud of. And I think the biggest thing for me was just having that passion, having that drive, and no matter where any of you football players that are on this call or any of you parents, where your son goes and plays football, at the end of the day, it's the same game that they've been playing all their life. And, whether you're playing in front of a crowd of 5,000, 10,000 or 60,000 at Ralph Wilson Stadium in Buffalo, usually the game always quiets down after the crowd always quiets down after the first play anyway. So, if you're really passionate about playing football, it doesn't really matter where you're playing or how many people are there. To be out there with 10 of your other brothers is just something that is very special and something that all of you should be very proud of if you get that opportunity.
Can I jump in and ask you a question, John? And
Yeah.
I want to make sure I pulled up the chat also. If there's any parents or players that have any questions you want to ask, again, I'm trying to keep the back and forth on the call down. Feel free to type it in. You should have the ability to type in a chat question. Again, we can talk about recruiting. You can ask John about how many tackles he got credited for that I actually made the tackle on, or whatever you want to do. But can I ask you, looking back with what you know, how would you handle the process nowadays, considering it's so different? I mean, how would you go through this? Obviously, you have a son. I'm not saying if he goes through it or not. How would you navigate this process now, knowing what you know now about how you went through it and what's happened in your career?
Really, I think for me, I would, I kind of went into college kind of backwards. I knew I wanted to play football. I just really didn't have any idea of what I want to do in terms of my career, after football was over. Because guys, eventually your football career is going to come to an end, whether you play, 4 or 5 years in college or maybe even 1 or 2 years. I mean, injuries happen, careers end. So the long term is something that, I wish I would have considered a little bit more. Heading into that process. But, I probably would have tried to gather as much information as I could, maybe take an extra day or so on the campus. If you are taking a recruiting trip and you're going up to a school and, the coaches are going to show you all the great things about the school and, some of the things that they're going to highlight, but maybe spend an extra day up there with your family and really get a feel for, how the campus operates, maybe, the area around the campus. Because if that's somewhere you're going to be spending for the next 5 years, you really want to make sure you're picking the right spot. So that's one thing I would probably consider. And, I'd probably, looking back on my process, I was very happy with the school that I chose. I really believed in Coach Ari's plan. But I probably would have maybe looked in other areas outside of Michigan, maybe just to consider, maybe if there were some other opportunities out there. Not to say that I would have picked any of those other schools, but just to have an open door, maybe in some other spots. I think I only went on like maybe four or five different visits, and they're all in Michigan for the most part. I knew I wanted to be close to home, but that might have been something I would have possibly considered. But at the end of the day, I was playing good quality football. I ended up, I'm still in a career that I went to school for. I'm a physical education teacher. That's what I went to college for. So after my career was over, I was jumped right into my second career as a teacher. I'm 13 years into that, and I see a lot of issues with social media. Mostly I teach all ninth graders, so I see a lot of kids these days that are really emotional when it comes to social media. There might be some type of bullying. There's a lot of jealousy when it comes to social media, and the reason why I bring that up is you can only really control what you can control. So if you're flipping through your phone and you're seeing a bunch of kids, you're only going to see their highlights. You're going to see their best plays. Most of these, I'm sure if kids are putting things up that are very impressive, I mean, obviously everyone's going to have their highlights, but it really comes down to what Dan said earlier, what Coach Pedrosi said is your productivity throughout your career. You're going to put your best plays up on the highlights, but you don't want to have that drop off from your junior or your senior year, like Coach mentioned. And I do see that. And like I've mentioned, I've seen that in the NFL where guys have gotten real big contracts. I've seen it with an offensive guard that signed a $50 million contract. And he didn't see out the rest of that contract because his production, he got all that upfront money and his production just dropped from there. And he ended up getting cut after 2 years. And he was like, I think he signed a 5-year extension. So he didn't see those other 3 years. So
let me jump in real quick, John, because I want to ask you. I mean, you brought up a good point. You only went to 3 or 4 visits, and we were on almost all of our recruiting visits together. And I see Hubert's jumped on, so I'm going to give Hubert a chance to kind of collect his thoughts and come on. He probably just got done either training somebody or drumming away. But nowadays, it's so easy to find out about schools all over the country because of social media. How would we even navigate that line, though? I mean, you said it, you might go on a couple more, maybe outside of the state, but because it just seems so easy to go everywhere, where would you draw that line? Where would you and your family have said, okay, we're going to go on this many, but we don't need to go on 20? This is something I talk to my families on about a lot, but I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on that. How would we navigate it now? Because we didn't know what we didn't know back then, but now.
I think that's a great question, and that's something I really didn't have to deal with back then. But I think that kind of goes back to what I said originally: is think about what you want your career to be after football, because again, your career is going to come to an end. And if you have the opportunity to play a full 5 years in college, I mean, you're blessed. To play after that, you're even more blessed to have that opportunity. But I think that if I were to back in the day when I was going through the process, narrow down, maybe 2 or 3 careers that I wanted to get into and things that I wanted to do to allow myself to have a successful life and a successful career after my football career is over, I think that would have kind of helped me navigate through some of these universities, just to see, if these schools even offered some of these programs that I was interested in. So, that's
Can I just wrap up with this,
where
John? It's kind of fair also, because nowadays, even more so than your time and our time playing together, if the opportunity to play at the next level comes up, they'll find you from anywhere, even more so now than when you came out, right? I mean, no one gets overlooked. So if you're playing at William Jewell and you're a dominant player, they're going to come scout you. Even when you were coming out, you had really good scouting, but it was still early in that process. So I think it's flipped even more so. We should be thinking education more, because they'll find you anywhere if you're that good, right? Am I kind of getting the sense that's a little bit of your message?
I mean, I think that there's just so many resources out there to make yourself marketable. And like you said, you have you have social media, you have Huddle, which I feel like is such a great tool. You could share your highlight film with any coach in the country. Back then we didn't have that. We had VHS tapes that you had to mail, and that was a big process to try to get that in the mail. And you hope that even the coach received it to look at it. So, I just feel like there's just so many more resources now that really benefit some of these younger players. And I think that's a great thing. But I think it all goes back to what you want to do post-career. to help you make your decisions.
Great point, John. I appreciate it. I'm going to kind of click over and give Hubert a chance to talk for a few minutes. And Carrie, we'll get a chance to answer your questions maybe at the end and give all of us a chance to talk a little bit about what you put in the chat regarding coaches to message and camps. But I want to introduce Hubert, and I'm going to give Hubert a chance to unmute himself here so he can jump in. Hubert Payne is graciously coming on and joining us. So Hubert came in with me and John at Saginaw Valley, and I was not very fast, but there were only two people that were slower than me running around the track at winter workouts, and it was John and Hubert. So that's where I'm really excited about having them both here. So I want to give Hubert a chance. Same thing. I didn't tell Hubert what to say. Hubert played for us and then transferred. And I will talk a lot with my AREN families about the pros and cons of transferring. That's not the discussion for tonight. But Hubert has also taken himself and built himself into an unbelievable career. He's drummer for Little Big Town. And he now is the director of a training facility in Nashville. And I've been talking to him over the last couple of months, and then I just gave him my thoughts on this topic, and I wanted to give him a chance to share his ideas, his message, kind of regarding that mindset in the recruiting process. So Hubert, I will pass it off to you for, again, I'd like to keep it around 20 or 25 minutes, but have at it, and looking forward to hearing your message.
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me, buddy. I really appreciate it. Good to see you. Good to see you, John. It's been a long time.
Good to see you.
Last time
Good to see you, Hubert.
But yeah, I started off in Saginaw Valley, and I've had a bit of a unique journey, and I'm in a really unique position now, working here at X3 in Nashville. Currently, I'm director of operations, and I kind of run the place. We do a lot of pre-draft training, and I recruit 40 guys to come to Nashville and train for their either pro day or combine. So I've been in the weeds of, we started off with a big board. We have an NFL scout that works with us. And we started off with a big board of guys, schools everywhere. And then I reached out to those guys and just tried to sell what we offer here at X3. And I've learned a ton. But backing up a little bit, Dan touched on it on the transfer process and how we make decisions. Obviously, Saginaw Valley State's a Division II school. I got upset and my ego was humongous when I was asked to move to defense. And so I ended up transferring to a Division I program. So I got to see what that was like. I had to sit a year. Interesting experience. And then I actually transferred down to Division III. I've played all across the board. And a lot of times I'll go around and speak to teams about, the intangible things that you get from college football when it's not focused on, D1 or bust, or did I go pro or not? And it's the relationships. I tell people all the time at Saginaw Valley, I look at a lot of my friends and I saw them get married on Facebook. And if I was submitted to a bigger vision or goal in myself, I probably would have been in those guys' weddings, right? And no one really talks about that part of it. And now that I'm in the weeds, like I said, with recruiting, and I work with scouts, and I'm on the phone with NFL agents every day. I'm on the phone with all these all-star games. There's so many opportunities days with, you got CGS, you got the Hula Bowl, the Chocolate Bowl, the LPA, the Senior Bowl, the Reese's Cup Bowl. All these games are games where small school guys have opportunities to show out in front of the scouts. So, for example, I don't know if you guys heard of Carson Newman. Carson Newman is a Division II school here in Tennessee. I would go and do some player development work with them. And they had a receiver who he's an All-American, D2 Heisman, and didn't have a lot of people coming after him. He didn't have an agent paying for training. But I got him here at X3, got him in an all-star game. And literally this week, he's got scouts up the wazoo calling his agent now. He's got an agent, all because he played in an all-star game. He did it at Carson Newman. So they will find you. Literally, I worked with the scouting director for the Titans for the last 16 years. His name is Blake Bedingfield, and I work hand-to-hand with him every day. And, there are scouts. So if there's a scouting director that scouting director manages scouts that has responsibility in each region of the state. And then there may be a small school guy. So they will find you. And my thing is, so tomorrow, so we've been in pre-draft prep for about 2 weeks now. And tomorrow is our first day of mental performance coaching. And my goal is, I work in the therapeutic space as well. So I'm going to help these guys gain a skill set where they can work on themselves. And to be honest, every player we have has been a dominant college football player. 1, maybe 2 will be drafted. Maybe 7 or 8 will be PFAs, preferred free agents, and they'll have a chance to make a team. But most of us will be in a situation where we're trying to transfer the skill set of football to the rest of life. And I saw something really interesting this morning on Good Morning America. It was a business coach talking about people switching jobs. And she said, people often talk about transferable skills, but we should be talking about translatable skills. And I want you guys, the athletes, the parents, the coaches that are on the call, it is super important that your ego is not found in just the game and that's your only identity, because you can still be a productive player if you can separate, I'm a human being, not a human doing. I am not the game. There's a lot of lies and a lot of toxicity and trauma that's wrapped up in taking the identity of the game. And the funny thing is that raises stress and anxiety and lowers your creativity. So you actually become less of a great, adequate player. So I would say, my heart is, I love seeing, parents and players who put themselves in position to just go for it. Chances are 1 in a million, but I'm gonna go for it. And the beauty and the most wealth that you'll see is seeing yourself go for it on the highest level. And that's what I hang my hat on every day, right? Because I recruited these guys to come here, and they are guys, I mean, we've got USC guys from Kansas, guys from Jackson State. I got all kinds of players. But the reality is, football is going to be more of a vehicle than the job. And the question is going to come back to you, did I lose my ego in the game? Did I play the game from a healthy place? Did I develop myself as a whole person? And people say that, but the same intensity that you work on your feet or your speed or your strength, it's possible to do that with your own personal development. And my heart is to bring that same intensity to your internal development, right? So that's what I do. And I would love to help with that on a side note. But, the D1 or bust, coming from someone who's played on all 3 levels, 6 years college football, some kind of way. And I'm in the middle of the recruiting process, and I work with agents. Even before I was with X3, I worked for an NFL agent, and I was just an in-house life coach. And even when it goes well, it's a short-term job that can set you up for amazing opportunities afterwards. So it's really going to be about the way you organize your experience, whether it goes exactly how you think or not, right? And I'll land the plane with this. I feel really blessed that, John and Dan know this, like I'm a worker. I may have come in last in long distance running, Dan, but I was the guy that stay in the weight room, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and do all I could. And I thought that the only treasure was playing in the league, right? And I mistakenly moved to Music City. I didn't know Nashville is Music City. I just came here because my brother was playing at TSU. And the gift was I took that mindset and those translatable skills and built a music career. I treated it just like a running back room. I'm like, wait a minute. I can walk down the street and watch 10 country drummers play. I can learn from them. I can take skills. And that self-awareness that I had as an athlete, that chip on the shoulder that I had from transferring schools and working super hard, then getting punched in the face. Working super hard, then not getting the chance. All of that energy was just seeds, and it came right back to me. And at this point, I've played all over the world. I've played on every night show multiple times. I'm the first African-American drummer to play on a platinum country record. And I played every song on that record. And it's been really cool, but I bet Dan and John probably didn't even know I played drums in college, right? But the skill set wasn't the drums. Just like I'm saying, don't get lost with your ego in the game. The skill set was patience, creativity, using conversation with people, understanding when to have an empty cup and be humble and just learn, right? So I don't know if there's a question part, Dan, but.
Well, let me ask you this, because that message was, again, Hubert, I didn't tell you what to say. I thought your message was really on point for what I believe as well, too. But let me ask you this, because this is something we talked about right before you jumped on. Now, I didn't know that you played drums, but I did teach you guitar playing. So I'm still kind of waiting for my royalty checks from all that playing that you did on the TV shows. But we talked a little bit about, I use the term chip on your shoulder. That's kind of driven me in even my career today. I'm out of coaching. My goal years ago was to be a head football coach. I'm out of coaching, but I still have that same passion. Is there an element, I don't actually want to talk about levels now when you answer this. Is there an element of playing the game just in general? You just talked about it. I mean, that drives you every day. I mean, you're talking about translatable skills. It's that chip on your shoulder you're carrying that you learn in the game, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're discussing here, as far as like everything you learn translates to keeping that drive going when you become 38, 39 like us and you can't play anymore, right? I mean, that's the beauty of this thing.
Yep. Yeah. And I think one thing that's huge is, like, there's going to be probably kids on this call that feel like, man, I don't know what else I love other than football. I don't care about anything else this much. I got family members, if I ask them, you know, when was the last time you felt as excited as running out the high school tunnel? And they'll say, I never have felt as excited as I was in high school playing football, right? But I think for me, I learned, if you can take that empty cup analogy, when you dissect something, curiosity is the birth of passion. So I trust that I may not be 100% interested in something, but my curiosity is going to lead to, okay, how do you do that? And then you reverse engineer it. And then that leads to more attraction. And then that creates a fire of passion. And then that passion points to whatever your destiny is or what path you should follow. So I was more obsessed with being able to control the narrative, but I didn't exactly know how it was going to turn out. But I did trust, man, what's a process I can fall in love with? And I might not love it right now, but if I'm curious about it, that's enough of a spark to create a culture where you can grow and get some real understanding in whatever it is that you end up doing.
And I think that's an interesting point here. And I'm going to answer Carrie's question. And then again, if anybody has any questions specifically for, especially Hubert or John, because all the families on here, you can reach out to me at any time. That's, part of what I've enjoyed working with the families, but you just made a really interesting point, because I talk to especially prospects and families about the recruiting process being that. Embrace that process of trying to get where you want to go. But at the end of the day, if you don't get to where you want to go, two things can happen. If you've challenged yourself to look at all the pros and cons, you can have a great experience. And at the same time, maybe that drive and passion leads you after the game.
That's right.
And maybe that is right after even high school, even for instance. And that's the thing I talk about. Like, again, I know there's so much pressure on the recruiting process, but let's find that balance. Let's swing the pendulum back where it's like, I'm going to use it as a motivator at 16, 17, 18 years old. But at the same time, I'm not going to let it weigh me down when maybe I don't get the outcomes that I want. And again, I think as I kind of wrap up my messaging, and again, if there's any other questions, especially for Hubert or John, throw them on the chat now. I'll be more than happy to bring them up. But to me, that's where it's not so much about saying it's D1 or bust. It's about embracing what you want in attacking this process. If this is all you want, I'll help you guide you, navigate you, give you thoughts and ideas. But at the end of the day, if this is all you want and that opportunity doesn't happen, I'm going to be talking to you at the end of the process about, well, football may be ending for you. And that's okay. That's 100% okay. Because as Hubert and both John said, it's going to end for everybody. Football's you can't play anymore. There's no rec league. I know John's still trying to get in the rec league where he can go out there and strap the pads on. Okay, there's not any that I know of. But if this is what kind of gets you going and we can't get there, then we have to embrace the opportunity to move forward. But if the opportunity is, I just want to ball, well, there's a lot of places you can just ball. And I think John had mentioned it earlier, like maybe in his process, looking back, he would have expanded his search. Nowadays, you can do that because of social media, because of the ease to send huddle out to coaches. But we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared for the pros and cons that come with each level? And I think that was a little bit of the message tonight. Obviously, I think John and Hubert really hit on transferring this stuff to life. I heard both of them say, you really should think more about outside of football and allow football to happen, because they both mentioned it. They can find you anywhere nowadays. This is not 1999, 2002, where we had to just hope and pray a scout knew one of our coaches and they would then come through and see us. It's just not like that anymore. You are hard pressed to find a great player that gets hidden in the weeds anymore. So I really think this message tonight, as we get ready to wrap up, and I really appreciate Hubert and John coming on, because all the families, you can reach out to me at any time. I talk to the coaches a lot, but hearing a different voice is going to be really valuable. So again, guys, I appreciate it very much. I want to wrap up with this, and I'll give just a few more seconds here as I answer this. I'll answer this question. One of the people put in the chat, did you contact college coaches that you were interested in playing for? How many college camps did you attend? Now, that was when John was talking, so I'm not sure if that was directed specifically to John, but as John was mentioning it, times have changed so much now. I would bet John only went to 1 or 2 camps. Going into my senior year, I went to the Central Michigan camp, and that was it. Things have changed. The one-day prospect camps were very early stages back there. John touched on it. Hubert touched on it. That's that fine balance for the families in here. We're going to be starting to talk about summer camps here in about a month, if we haven't already. That is the most challenging thing to decide now. John mentioned it. If he had a chance maybe to go back and do it again, he would expand his horizon a little bit. But now the horizon is so expansive, not going to every school in the country is probably the biggest challenge, because Hubert touched on it, what that can do to your mind, and understanding that, hey, we might be pulling away from the process here. This was about playing ball. This was about going out and finding an opportunity to keep playing. But if you just keep chasing that, that carrot, maybe we're kind of losing track, and we need to bring this thing back a little bit. Now, how many college camps does each specific prospect? That is completely unique to everybody. That is, what Hubert decides to do or Dan Pedrosi decides to do cannot drive John DeGiorgio. And so that's where the college camp thing is completely unique. I always say this. This will be my last statement on this question. If anybody else has any last ones, now's the time to throw it in the chat. I really feel very strongly about trusting your high school coach in that process for 2 reasons. They see you every day. They truly know how talented you are. They've also had prospects that have come through, and they can use their comparisons and experience, but they also have the pulse of the college coaches. And I know everyone's trying to reach out to college coaches, and that's part of what I do a little bit with AREN Consulting, but you have to trust that they're probably getting the best possible feedback. And even with that, it's still very gray. It's very hard to navigate those murky waters of what's real and what's not. So I think the message, I really enjoyed it. Hubert, John, I appreciate it. I wanted to keep this right around an hour. I hope my message, because I wrote some things up and I know my handwriting is not the best, but my message is about understanding that everything comes with pros and cons. There's some families on here, and again, I'm starting to get to know some of the new ones, but there's families on here whose their son has 10, 15, 20 offers, and there's some families on here who haven't even heard from a college coach yet, and everywhere in between. We have to think about the pros and cons. There is no perfect fit. The reality is, make this thing transferable. I'm going to steal that from you, Hubert. Okay, just like you stole my music skills from me and applied it to your music career. You have to transfer this thing, and you have to think about life after football. But this process can be fun. It can be rewarding. And listen, if it's about playing D1, I'm here to help you and talk to you about it. But if you just want a ball, I'm here to help you and talk to you about it. But each of these levels, each of these opportunities come with pros and cons. I don't see any other questions in there, but again, this is recorded. Coaches, you will have this recording here shortly as soon as I get a chance to make sure I download it. I want to let everybody get going until past 9 o'clock at the Eastern time zone. I thank everybody for their time. Again, for all the families that know me and the new ones, you can reach out to me at any time. Okay, you can just simply text me. I've already started talking to some of the new families. I really enjoy this process, but the messaging is going to be very big for me in 2023. It is going to be vital that we get our minds right in this process and not let it wear us down from who we are as people, who we are as student athletes. And I'm not saying this is the most important, but I'm seeing it affect athletic performance. So we have really got to attack this message. I'm very passionate about it. Again, hopefully a lot of this made sense, but again, this is stuff I will be more than happy to talk to you all more about. So Hubert, John, thank you to everybody who jumped on. I really appreciate the time. And again, I will share this message. Have a great night, everybody. Enjoy the rest of January. Thanks, everyone.